Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak about a century-long dispute. For 100 years plus, there's been a dispute about the federal designation of North America's tallest mountain. It's a pretty majestic picture, but it does nothing to really convey the amazing grandeur of Denali. It is majestic, it is breathtaking, it is something that as Alaskans and as a lifelong Alaskan, there is not a day when I am able to see Denali and just kind of breathe deep, because it's that extraordinary. In my hometown of Anchorage, we're about 250 miles away from Denali. And on the clear days, when you are on the road just about a mile from my house, just a little bit of elevation, you can see the mountain. And we talk about it that way. We say, she's out. The mountain's out today. The big one is out today. It is an extraordinary gift from God, really. Snow-blanketed crevices, the ridges are just gleaming in the sun. How this mountain connects earth to sky beyond, it's just extraordinary. And again, this picture is beautiful. Obviously, on a summer day, there is never a time when when she is not covered in snow. But Denali can also be one of the coldest, most treacherous places on Earth. It has storms in the middle of winter. You expect that, but it has storms in the middle of July that obey no rules. It has its own rules. Denali creates its own weather. It literally creates its own weather. I had an opportunity to go up on Ruth Glacier on my birthday. My birthday happens to be the end of May. It was going to be an extraordinary big-ticket item. It was a big-ticket item, but we were chased off that mountain after about 40 minutes because the weather, which when we had arrived at the mountain, was pretty great. And in 40 minutes, she was shutting down. And we were either going to be spending the night there, which was not prime condition to do, or we were getting off. And in order to get out safely, you respect her. But it is a place where you respect the nature around you, because what can be that perfect day can descend with wind and snow into chaos. It falls on you so quickly you can't see your own footprints in the snow. The lives that have been lost and the legends of the stories told remain, but no matter what happens with the weather, as transitory as all that is, Denali stands resilient and true. For centuries, the Koyukon Athabascans have lived, they've hunted, they've foraged, they've loved, they've died, they've survived in the shadow of this great mountain. They've been on the waterways, in the valleys, on the hills, and in the ridges. Alaska Natives have persevered in one of the most challenging climates, and they've done so in harmony with the food supply and the surroundings around them. Denali is Koyukon for the Great One. For the Great One. This is how Native people have always known it, and as the great witness of untold stories from their ancestors. The very first ever map to label the mountain read Tenada, and this is a transcription of Denali, again, the Great One. The first mountaineers to summit the peak called it Denali. It's interesting to note that the first individual to actually summit was not the mountaineers who had paid for the climb, but it was the Alaska Native Guide who took them safely and successfully to the top. But it is those same Native people, those same mountaineers that were baffled that anyone would dare to modify the original Native name. And yet, in 1917, the mountain was not named Denali. And there's a fair amount of legend that comes with that as well, that there was a trapper who came out of the woods, and this was during the early days of the President McKinley administration, and he said, out of respect, let's honor the new president. But much like native lands, health and culture, you just don't come in and say, we're going to disregard, we're going to disrespect the rightful name, the name that had been in place for generations, for thousands of years. And so since that time in 1917, the Board on Geographic Names has received over 20,000 letters and signatures, most of them, the vast majority of them, calling for the name Denali to be restored. This massive mountain commands a reverent name, a steadfast name, not the name of an individual, a person who comes and goes, who may have had an impact for a brief moment in time. But this is ageless, timeless, the great one. 20,310 feet tall, the tallest mountain in North America. And so when you have something that is that significant, that is that connected as part of the land in ways that are beyond just a mere name, but again, a reverence with which you speak of this piece of land, this geography. When Alaskans leave our home state and boast outside to people, whether we're spinning a globe or just talking about it, we say, that's Denali, that's the great one. She's out today. So that is why today I have introduced legislation that would officially restore the federally recognized name of this quintessential mountain as Denali. Now, this is not the first time I've done this. This is actually the fourth Congress that I have introduced this legislation. Maybe I'm persistent, but I think Alaskans are just very resilient, and we will continue to be. We will continue to be because this magnificent mountain is something that each of us hold in our heart, that we hold dear. For these last 100 years or so, we've continued to call our great mountain Denali, regardless, and we'll continue to do that 100 years going forward. Denali existed before any person, and it will remain long after we are dust. So I share this with my colleagues today, letting you know that we put this legislation out there. My introduction follows on the actions of the Alaska State Legislature. Both the House and the Senate have moved a resolution urging us in Congress to move forward with this and officially restore the federally recognized name. And so I'm pleased to be able to begin that process today. Now, Mr. President, I want to shift gears for just a moment. Colleagues know that I am the chairman of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. I've been on this committee since I came to the Senate, and it is a position that I hold very close. I represent a constituency of Alaska Natives back in my home state. We have over 1/2 the tribes in the United States of America, and so my responsibility to them as their federal representative is one, again, that I take very, very seriously. There have been There's been a fair amount of confusion, I think, uncertainty that has been brought about by many of the executive orders, some of the federal actions that we have seen, whether it's funding freezes or programs that are being put on pause. But one area that I want to make very, very clear to colleagues, as I have sought to make clear to those that are part of the incoming administration, that when we are speaking about our Indian tribes and our tribal programs and the federal funding that they receive, they do not receive this due to they do not fall into the category, if you will, of diversity, equity, inclusion. And so when the executive order was announced in the very first week of the Trump administration, there was confusion as to whether or not Indian and tribal programs were impacted. And in that confusion, I think a lot of undue stress and anxiety. And so I immediately asked the OMB, I met with Mr. Vogt personally, and I asked him to take steps immediately to reaffirm the unique treatment, the programs and services to Indian tribes based on their political and their legal status, which is recognized in our U.S. Constitution, in our treaties, in our many federal laws and policies, to ensure that there is no disruption to our federal tribal programs. We know our Supreme Court has affirmed our Indian tribes are a unique political class. This is not a racial one, and their sovereignty and their trust relationship with the federal government must be upheld. And I shared this in a letter to the acting director of OMB. We have seen, at least in a couple of the departments already, that they clearly understand this distinct legal and political relationship. The Department of Interior very quickly moved to add clarification. On the 30th of January, the Department of Interior issued a secretarial order that acknowledges that nothing in their order should be construed to affect the activities that implement the legal requirements independent of the EOs, including the statutory authorities, treaty, and/or trust obligations of the department to our tribal nations and to our Native Hawaiian community. And so I appreciated that very clear message coming out of the Department of Interior so early. I think that it can be used as that model, as that template for other federal agencies, because it's not just within Interior that we see tribal and tribal programs. It is in other areas. We have just recently seen out of the Department of Health and Social Services that they recognize that as well. We are working again to make sure that any tribal programs have the clarity that they need and an assurance that they and the beneficiaries will not be impacted. We have a trust responsibility, we have an obligation that is clear, and so avoiding any confusion, misunderstanding, or anxiety is something that I think we owe to our Indigenous peoples across the country. And I'm thankful that many within the new administration have stepped up to work with us to clear up any confusion that may be out there. So with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.